Okay. Crash course in Thanksgiving. I'm not really going to lecture on it. I'm just going to let you pepper me with questions and any issues that you had with in the past. Any questions you may have, anything you don't understand. Let's hear them.
Can you sous vide the turkey?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we do. We do a Thanksgiving dinner here every year. Very, very simple. Very simple. Turkey breast, sous vide. Here's what I do. Take the breast. So I like to slice it. So I brine it first. Not because we're actually going to cook at a lower temperature, so the muscle fibers aren't going to dry out. So the brining is optional, but I like to brine it because I like the texture it gives my turkey. It gives you those condensed muscle fibers. So when you cut it, it's like, nice and condensed, like solid piece of meat. Also, it seasons the turkey well all the way through, and I like that kind of salty turkey flavor, even though it's not like salty per se. But I like it. But that's an optional step. So cut off the turkey breast. I remove the wings and I remove the skin because I'm not going to crisp the skin. If you're going to serve the turkey whole or the turkey breast whole, you could pan roast like we do the chicken breast. But you're then going to go back, you're going to slice it anyways, and the skin's going to start to break apart and probably sog out. So I just focus on just having that perfect piece of white meat. So I take the turkey breast, I drop it into a Ziploc bag. I do the Ziploc bagging method. Add a couple pats of butter. Why?
More butter. More better.
There you go. Some peppercorns if you want them. Sprig of thyme. Purely optional, but I like to drop in like some dried fruit. And you can also drop in a little bit of stock if you have it. I usually don't. I just push all the water out. The butter will melt and then it kind of floats on top of the turkey breast as the turkey breast is in the water. And it just kind of creates a barrier, but you still have like a buttery flavor.
About how much butter?
A couple of pats. If you accidentally add too much butter, I don't think it's going to ruin it. It'll make it better. But yeah, I mean, literally a couple of pats per bag, per gallon Ziploc bag. Okay. Then I sous vide at 60°C, 140°F, a medium temperature for 4 hours. This is why people go nuts over our turkey breast on Thanksgiving, is because they've never had a medium turkey breast. Most people have never had a turkey breast that hasn't just been totally cooked and destroyed and dry, right? It's because it's really hard to do, especially if you're cooking a whole turkey. Especially since, again, Butterball doesn't want to get sued, so they tell you to take your big 14-pound turkey, roast it in the oven until it reaches an internal temperature of 185 degrees Fahrenheit, just because they think that you're incompetent of taking the temperature in the right place. And then you have that thermal mass of that 14-pound turkey that continues to cook. And yeah, it's safe to eat, but not good. But also the reason why they tell you to take the internal temperature of 185 is because most people are hell-bent on stuffing their turkey. When you look at how a heat gradient works, you have heat diffusion going through, you have possible salmonella in your turkey, right? So you have the juices of that turkey dripping into the center of your turkey, which is the stuffing, which is the last thing to heat. So if I take a thermometer and I stick it in my turkey breast and it's at 165, my stuffing is not at 165. It's now contaminated with possible salmonella. So then I pull it out, I carve it, I take the stuffing out, serve it to my family, they all get sick and salmonella poisoning, and I blame it on Butterball for selling me a bum turkey.
What's the correct internal temperature?
Well, it depends because we have that temperature gradient, right? So this is going to be a medium temperature, but because we hold it there for 4 hours, it's going to be pasteurized, it's going to be safe to eat. The proper internal temperature is when your turkey rests completely. If you want it to be 100% safe to eat, it has to be at 165 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 15 seconds. But if you pull your turkey at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to have at least a 10 to 15 degree carryover cook before it drops back down. So if I was going to be roasting my turkey the traditional method, I'd pull it out at like 145, 150.
With no stuffing.
With no stuffing. I always do the stuffing separate. But I also never traditionally roast a turkey. I cut off the breast, I treat them separate. I cut off the leg and thighs, I treat them separate.
So what do you do with the leg and thighs while you're sous videing the breasts?
You can sous vide those as well. Same exact process, but for 6 hours.
Is that time going to vary depending on the size of the turkey for either?
A little bit, but not really, because so a turkey breast is pretty tender. So once it hits 140, it's perfectly cooked, and it'll hit that 140 temperature within an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours if it's a really big turkey, and then we hold it there for another hour and a half to pasteurize it to make it safe to eat at that temperature. So, and then we add a little bit more time for a total 4 hours of cooking time because it's just our insurance policy to make sure that it's absolutely safe to eat. But you could literally leave the turkey breast in for upwards of 6 to 8 hours, and it's not going to affect their flavor or texture. But at 4 hours, it'll be done.
So if you wanted to cook it whole, you could take the whole thing and stick it in there for 6 hours?
No, that would probably take a little bit longer. That, because it's just more thermal mass to penetrate and it's in irregular shape. So for that, you're looking at 12 hours. Just to be safe. It would quite possibly be done at 6 to 8 hours. But also you want to make sure that the turkey is thoroughly pasteurized because you don't want to give people food poisoning on Thanksgiving. It's kind of a bummer. Okay.
Maybe they don't come
That would be
back.
hard to pull it back.
Yeah, so this would... So more realistically, you'd be taking your turkey and splitting it in half. I mean, and it'd have to be, the thing is too, this is talking about a big, like 12-pound turkey, which I don't think this would even be possible to do with. You would need some really big bags, you need a big pot. So if you got
Big bags.
What's that?
They do make giant bags.
Yeah, they make turkey bags.
They make
Yeah.
They make giant Ziploc bags.
Yeah.
They come in XXXL that you could fit a comforter.
How many people
So they
have
make
they-
them big.
Oh, okay.
How would you make your leg and thighs attractive? I mean, because that, like, everybody wants to eat it because it's all brown.
I love dark meat. But so the way, okay, so
Because it's going to look funny out of the sous vide, right?
oh yeah, so secondary cooking process, you brown it. Just like I wouldn't take a filet mignon out of the sous vide bag and serve it to you like it looks like a piece of poached meat. I'm going to sear it. So you pull it out of the bag, you let it cool to room temperature. If you have a good broiler, my broiler at home sucks. Like, it's just not very good. But if you're lucky enough to have a good broiler that radiates heat evenly, then you stick it on the highest shelf, and all you're going to do is just crisp that turkey skin. You could also pan fry. So just a regular like sear isn't going to be enough oil in the pan. So you want to fill the oil with it because the turkey leg is kind of a weird concave shape. So you want to add enough oil to place the turkey leg skin side down to crisp that skin, maybe turn it over and brown it, and then you serve it that way.
You do a deep fry.
Oh, absolutely, you could do a deep fry.
And all this.
Uh-huh.
That'd probably
But you have to,
be pretty amazing.
so what do you do with the breasts? You hand sear them?
Nope. So when I serve it here, I'm going for the truest expression of a turkey breast, which is, I want to give people a turkey breast that they haven't eaten before, as far as just like moisture and like. So we're really kind of showcasing the delicacy of that white meat. So I'll literally, during service on Thanksgiving dinner, I just have a bunch of bags lined up with already cooked turkey breast just sitting in there, already warm. Pull one out of the bag, slice a couple of slices off, put it on the plate, send it out. That's it. So with this, I would just slice it thinly. I don't really think that you need to brown it because we've already removed the skin, because the skin kind of shrinks up and does weird things when you sous vide anyways, because I don't have the wing bone still attached. But you could literally just cut the breast off with the rib cage still attached and sous vide it like that, then serve it on the bone, if that's what you want to do. But by the time you take the breast, because you're always going to be serving it family style, so you're slicing it into thin slices anyways, so that skin's not going to really translate. It's not going to really stay attached to the breast. So I just pull it off and don't really deal with it.
And you'll never have pink juices after you sous vide. So somebody says, "Oh, it's not cooked."
No, but you will have pink bones. So if you sous vide bone on, when people eat down to the bone, they will be pink because even though they're pasteurized, they haven't been taken to the point of temperature where it's gray. But if you have just the turkey breast in there, it's going to be white flesh all the way through. Another thing, so you could take your turkey legs, you can cut them off and confit them like we demonstrated the other day, where you're just basically cooking them in fat. You can go buy some duck fat. If you don't have duck fat, you can just use canola oil with some aromatics. And that slow cooking is a nice way to tenderize, and you can pop them out of the oven and into your broiler, or pop them out of the oil and put them into a hot oven or a broiler just to crisp them.
And how long would you confit a leg or a thigh?
About 6 to 8 hours in a 200-degree oven. But
It's totally immersed in oil.
Yep, and it's just until they're tender. You know, you grab their bone, you give them a little wiggle. When they seem to be tender, then they're good to go, and you just pull them out. You let them cool in the oil.
If you are not putting a dressing, so you've cut up your bird and you're making a dressing, do you have any special recipe for like a casserole dressing without offal?
Without offal? Yeah. So first you just leave the offal out.
Without what?
Without livers and gizzards?
innards.
Some people like that. I don't. But
Yeah. So my basic approach is to set up for success by planning a few days out. All right. So I break the turkey down. Leg and thighs I treat separately from the breast. So now I have the carcass and I have the wings. And you also have the neck, which are all going to be great for turkey stock. So I roast it for some flavor. I make a nice turkey stock just like you would with a chicken stock. And now I have that to work with. We take our basic white bread recipe, which you can find on our website, but it's just any white bread recipe really. And you can use cornbread, you can use any kind of bread. I like to use white bread. I leave the crust on, cut it into cubes about that size, lay it out on a sheet tray, and I let it stale overnight at least, maybe as much as a day and a half. Okay, then I get my aromatics going. So you have your onions, shallots, garlic, fennel if you want it, celery if you want it. I'm just going to sweat it all down in some butter. And what I mean by sweat is I'm just going to cook it over moderate heat to kind of release the aroma and to soften the vegetables. But I'm not looking to brown them. Why? Personal preference. If you want to have brown aromatics in your dressing, then brown them.
They're not oil?
Butter. You can use oil.
I use both.
But why use oil when you can use butter?
Our southern tradition, we make the cornbread in the cast iron skillet where we saute the mirepoix and then throw the cornbread batter in there and then so it's got the roasted flavor of the vegetable of the mirepoix, and then we also throw the raw celery and then into the dressing mix. So we get a mix of both flavors.
Yeah, and that's and adding some of the raw flavors in there are just going to give you a different textural element. I mean, obviously they're going to cook when you bake it, so it all comes together. But it all comes down to, I mean, there's a million different ways to make it. But for me, the main thing is you're looking ahead. You have your turkey stock that you made a couple days before, and you're basically hydrating your stale bread in that turkey stock. You can add a couple of eggs, which will help to enrich it and also help to set it up. And you mix it in, and I kind of do a little slap test. So I mix with my hands, and when I mix it, it should be bouncy. Like when that bread starts to sog out, I just kind of get a little pat back and forth. And there shouldn't be any moisture leaking out from the bread. It should all be one cohesive mass. And it takes a little time for your breadcrumbs or your croutons that you made by letting them stale rehydrate into that stock. But once I can kind of like just bounce it around, it's responsive, and I have my mirepoix and all my other ingredients mixed in there, then I just place it into a hotel pan and I bake it. And I prefer to bake it slow at first, maybe like 325, with tin foil on top, just to kind of set it all up, so the bread will start to start to set a starch gel, and then I'll remove the top once the dressing is set, and then I'll turn up the heat a little bit just to get a little bit of a brownness on top of my stuffing. So that's what I prefer, and I kind of like my stuffing juicy. Like I don't really like a dry stuffing, but some people do. So you can adjust your moisture content based on that. But then, I mean, the biggest takeaway is get your bird thawed a few days ahead of time or a week ahead of time, and start doing some prep work. Cut off the breast, cut off the legs, make your stock, because that stock's gonna get you way ahead. It's gonna get you ready for your dressing. It's gonna get you ready for your gravy. Then it's gonna get you ready for your leftover turkey soup the following day.
So it's like a savory bread pudding then you'd be making?
Yeah.
Okay.
Minus the cream, because I usually put cream in my bread pudding, but not in the stuffing. Yes, sir.
So I was thinking, would this be good to like practice the next couple of weeks with the chicken? I mean, do the same kind of concept, but,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So, would it be, I don't know if this is going to be a not very tasteful question, but, you know, I don't really make breads very well yet. So I do the cornbread that I make, but then I use the dried dressing, the, you know, packaged stuff.
Yeah.
So I do like a half and half. But if I were to take one of your sourdough bowls and chop it up and freeze it before Thanksgiving, would that
It doesn't work quite as well in my opinion. We've tried it. We've tried to make it with sourdough. It's the flavor's a little bit too strong, and it doesn't hydrate as well as the white bread, because white bread has some fat in there. When we tested it, it was hit and miss. Some people liked it, some people didn't. I didn't, so we didn't serve it.
Right. So the baguette wouldn't work then either, or is that still
No.
too sour? It's the same dough basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you ever add sausage or fruit or nuts or?
You can add all that stuff. So this is just when we're talking about the dressing that I make, it's all basic, you know, because she wanted a sort of a dressing concept. So what we just talked about was the technique of it, which is basically stale bread mixed with a stock that's made ahead of time, and the sweating of the vegetables and aromatics. From there, you start to add your own flavor profiles. So even if I said no to the dried fruit, which would be a lie, if you like dried fruit in it, you should have said, well, you know, he's crazy. I'm going to add dried fruit to mine. I'm going to add some roasted garlic. I'm going to add some thyme, whatever, and kind of get creative with it.
And if you're doing,
Yes.
using any alcohol like Grand Marnier or something like that, you would probably just add that to your aromatics maybe, just to
Yes, I'd flame exactly.
alcohol. Because I made that mistake of, I didn't think about, I didn't burn off the alcohol. And it didn't,
Yep.
it's not a good flavor.
So anytime you're softening aromatics at all, flaming with alcohol is a good time to incorporate your alcohol, so you can reduce it down and let it flame off. Yes, sir.
I usually have to cook 2 turkeys. I'm trying to make one more spicy because I like it.
Mhm.
And I've been experimenting with injecting like some spicy mix into the chicken itself, to the turkey itself. And it works out okay, but a lot of the flavor gets lost while I cook. Any thoughts on
What's your spice mixture?
It's something different every year. Usually with cayenne pepper
As the base? Yeah, I mean, for me, I would probably go more with a rub, and just make like a paste, and just rub the turkey down, and that's actually where a sous vide is actually going to come into play again and make your life easier. Because what happens is when you have, cayenne and paprika is a big part of blackening seasoning. So, but with the length of time that you have to cook a turkey without using sous vide in a dry environment, it's gonna burn and blacken on you. But you could literally do a blackened turkey, and you just want to be really, really aggressive with your rub. You know, so maybe melt some butter in there into the spices. You can even be careful because you don't want to gas yourself out of the kitchen by cooking some really like spicy, like cayenne or something. But you can take your other complementary spice that you can add, possibly toast them up and grind them into a powder, and then you cook them in butter, just like we do a curry, to make a paste, and then you let it cool in a bowl. You add your cayenne just for heat. You can add other peppers that you like. You could even take some raw chili peppers and blend them up in a blender and add this all to the mix. And then if it still seems a little bit stiff, you would add just a little bit of stock or even some water, or even some wine, just to thin it out to where it's a pasty consistency. And you just rub your turkey both sides. And the way that I would do this is I would just split the turkey in half. I would cut the backbone out. I would cut the breastbone just straight up. So now I have 2 halves. I'd rub the bone side really good. I'd rub the top side very good. I'd put them in a edge seal bag. Because I want to keep it a I don't want a bunch of liquid in the bag, so you might need extra liquid to sink it with the Ziploc method. So you just use like your edge sealer, and you edge seal it, and you cook it sous vide and you can do this a couple days in advance. So you can just spend one day cooking your 2 half of turkeys, for 6 to 8 hours. You maybe leave it in a little bit longer or overnight to be safe. So you do like, but no more than 12 hours. And then the day of, you can drop it back in your circulator just to retherm it a little bit so you get that core temperature up. Then you cut out of the package, you go straight into a hot oven. As soon as your spice rub starts to blacken, you have a spicy blackened turkey.
When you do it ahead of time, again, do you have to ice bath it, fridge, and then like 30 minutes?
So it all depends on the size. So like a fillet of fish, I could, first of all, I'm not going to pre-cook a fillet of fish because it's just going to happen too quickly and it's going to change the texture. But something like a thin beef tenderloin, after it's been cooked, it takes maybe 15 to 20 minutes for it to retherm or heat all the way through to the core. Something like a turkey, about an hour to 2 hours, depending on the size and if you split it. But again, you have that large window of opportunity to pull it. So the thing is, you set up your circulator, you get prep, and you say, okay, I'm about 4 hours out from doing dinner, so I'm just going to drop it all in. And then you have your mashed potatoes, which are easy to keep warm. You have your gravy that's easy to keep warm. You have your stuffing that you can that's in the oven. You bring it out, you tent with foil. So now all of a sudden your execution is a lot more simplified because you have the main component that you always have to fuss over, the turkey, ready to go, and everything else is ready. You just pop it in the oven and roast.
With Barbara's idea of the sausage, would you pre-cook that before you put it in the stove?
I would. And because it releases fat, I would cook that with my aromatics, so it's going to release that sausage fat in my aromatics. And then when you have all that fat in your pan, I wouldn't pour it out. I would add that into your bread mixture. Okay. So because you have all that sausage fat, why waste it? Yes.
Would you do something with sweet potatoes with your Thanksgiving dinner?
It depends. We had a classic version of that my cousin used to do, and he would take sweet potatoes, he'd cut them into wedges, and then he would take Granny Smith apples and cut those into wedges, and he would alternate them in like a glass Pyrex dish, and he would cover it with a bunch of brown sugar and butter that was mixed together, and you just slow cook it, and you get like this sweet like potato apple-y brown sugar cinnamon thing that was really good.
How about traditional mashed potatoes?
Traditional mashed potatoes.
Especially when you're doing a big, pot of them.
I keep mine warm in a crock pot.
That's a great way to do it. Crock pot is a great way to keep them warm. But as far as my method, more butter, more better. Okay. So I don't add a whole lot of cream to my mashed potatoes. I add a little bit, but you want to. So if you want to make the best mashed potatoes ever, which isn't really necessary, but the way that potato starch forms or gels, you have to hold it at a certain temperature. So you want to bring your potatoes up.
These are peeled potatoes, right?
Peeled potatoes.
Russets.
Yep, I prefer russets. You can use gold. I like russets. So you peel your potatoes, you cut them up. The first step you want to do is you want to rinse them like rice. So you put them in your pot, you run them under cold running water, and you agitate them with your hand. You pour off the starch, and once your water isn't running clear or starts to run clear after you agitate, then you've released a lot of the surface starch. Now you want to gel the surface starch, which is a really finicky and anal and unnecessary step, but it will make your potatoes better because it'll make them ungluey. And the way that you do that is you bring up to 160 degrees Fahrenheit in a pot or in a circulator, and you hold it there for 2 hours.
This is the water temperature.
Yes, it's water temperature.
And the potatoes are already in here?
Yeah.
Sorry, you said you started them
That's what he said.
cold and brought.
Start it cold, bring it up to 160. You can just, if you have an induction burner that's a little more accurate in holding heat, that's helpful. But you can just fuss with the flame a little bit. And it's not that hard to hold at 160. And you hold it at 160 for 2 hours. And what that does is it fully gels the starch in the potatoes, which keeps them from being gluey. And to set that starch gel, just like you have to cool off bread, you have to cool off the potatoes. So You run them under cold water. You can ice bath them. And then, after they're completely cold, you boil. So again, cover them with cold water, bring them to a simmer, and simmer until tender. And this intermittent step right here is there just to set that gel. But if you start with this and you skip this step, so if you rinse your potatoes well, all right, and then you boil them until tender, you're still going to have great mashed potatoes. Because the next step is to make them fine without overworking them.
So, boil, I'm sorry, I missed it again. Do you start those again in the cold
Yep.
and bring them to the boil?
Yep. Because it's a root vegetable.
Even though they've already been.
Yes, because the first is not a high enough temperature to soften them. You're holding them at that temperature to fully gel the starch.
And what's the outcome gonna be different than if you just do, like you said, rinse?
Very, very, very creamy and not gummy at all. But, again, I stress, that's a finicky, geeky step to take. Because if you don't overwork your mashed potatoes, then they shouldn't be gluey either.
Could you do that first gel step the day before?
Absolutely, you can do it a couple days before.
Yeah, that's what's nice, when you can do,
Uh-huh.
but then you still have to, cook them and mash them and all that.
Right.
Can you do I've tried mashing them ahead of time, I don't know if it really works, unless you had a lot of fat or cream cheese or that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a big proponent of stuff like sous vide, is because it allows me to take items that would certainly take a lot of my attention and time, and I can focus on things that you can't really do ahead. Mashed potatoes are one of them. You can definitely hold mashed potatoes warm, like in a crock pot or in bain marie on your stove, for at least a couple hours, no problem. So you don't have to do them like right before you serve, but you do have to do a day of, and you don't really want to hold it any longer than 3 hours on the stove. Yes.
Let's see here. So how do you do the ricer or the whatever to not work on much?
Yeah, so let's go in descending order of my preference. Okay? So after you boil and they're tender, you want to mash.
Do you let them rest at all after you pour the water off?
No.
Or just pour
So
the
it's
water off?
pour the water off and you move it to the next stage because you want to work with them while they're still warm. Okay? Also, for about every potato you have, every large russet potato you have, you want to have at least a half pound of butter. No.
Every like 5, 6.
For every large russet potato,
8-ounce potato or so?
you want a half pound of butter.
So kind of pound or ounce per ounce?
Actually, let me rephrase that. For every large russet potato you have, I'm gonna want a half pound of butter.
There you go.
Now here's the thing. Yes. Here's why my food and my mashed potatoes will be better than yours all the time, is because I have no shame when it comes to adding butter and salt. Straight up. So my mashed potatoes will always be better because people will never think to add that much butter to their potatoes. Okay? And you don't even have to measure it. You basically just want to look at it and be like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how pissed off would my cardiologist be at me? And when you reach about a scale of 8 or 9, your mashed potatoes are perfect. Okay?
So start buying butter on sale.
Costco.
Yeah, go to
But the
Costco.
rest you get in like those big bags are not.
No, not that big. So for every like, small russet potato, you're gonna want to at least have 2 ounces of butter. Okay? And an ounce of cream. And you won't always use it all, but you want to have that amount so you can incorporate it quickly. And you want to have it melted on your stove. Okay, so you have the cream and the butter on your stove melted together.
So you add the butter melted.
And warm, because it'll cool off your potatoes. Also, the melted butter will, just the warm fat in general will more evenly coat the starch granules of your potatoes. Okay, so mashing.
Cream, not half and half, not milk, cream.
Heavy whipping cream. All right. Look at. Don't be unreasonable, okay? Thanksgiving isn't the day to be health conscious. Okay? Yes, sir.
There's all the leftovers that go on for
Any
days.
difference between manufacturing cream and whipping cream for?
No, they're the same thing. Yeah, they both have a high enough fat content. Okay, so mash. So smasher is my least favorite. I don't like smashed potatoes. Personal preference. Some people like the texture in them. For me, especially in a restaurant, I hate smashed potatoes because my mom can do that at home with overcooked potatoes and a fork. So there's nothing special to me about it. So that's my least favorite. So I like smooth. So you can use a food mill, which is a plate die, and you just kind of crank and crank and crank, and you work the potatoes through. And you want to work in smaller batches, and for every 3 cranks this way, you want to go a crank that way, because it helps to clean off that die, and then you start to force it back through. So it actually works relatively well, especially if you do this step of holding at 160 for 2 hours to preset the gels, or pre-gel the starch. But you do run the risk of overworking the potatoes. Again, if you work in small batches, it's not a big deal. Okay. My next favorite is a ricer. And you can pick these up pretty inexpensive. They're like $30. And they basically are big enough to fit one whole potato, but you just have potato chunks anyways. Throw them in there while it's still warm, and it's like a lever thing, and just push it through. Looks like a big garlic press is what a ricer looks like. So you're ricing them, and because you're not over mixing or you're not mixing thoroughly, you're not risking making mashed potatoes glue.
But you don't do anything with them after that? You just rice them into a bowl?
Rice them into a mixing bowl.
Okay, so they kind of have a different look. They would look differently than
He's not done
mashed.
yet.
Oh yeah. I'm not done yet. But yeah, so they're gonna be creamy versus hand mashed, where they're always gonna have particles in them. So this, you're just taking a masher, you're mashing and you're adding in your butter, right? And you usually do it on the stovetop. Okay. Again, if you like that method, if you like to have some texture, that's a personal preference. The ricer and the food mill are going to give you a smooth texture. And then my ultimate favorite way to do it is passing it through a tammy or a tamise, which is a screen drum, because you're handling it the least with that. Where it's basically, I drop the potatoes on the flat screen, I take a rubber hand spatula, like a board scraper, and just I press it through, boom. And I scrape off the bottom side, it all falls into a bowl. Now, with this first method, the smasher, you're basically just adding your fat and butter and your hand smashing, your seasoning with salt and pepper, whatever else you like, throwing some chives, you're done. A food mill ricer tamise, you're putting that into a mixing bowl, and now you are taking your butter and your cream that's warm on your stove, and you drizzle it in while you gently fold in the fat with a rubber spatula, okay? You can use a whisk, but be very careful, because the more you mix, the more you risk your potatoes becoming glue. Once you add in your fat, now it's time to do your final seasoning. So a little bit of, you season with your salt. Now, again, because you have so much fat and so much starch, and mashed potatoes are heavy in general, they can take a heavy hand of seasoning. So don't be shy with your salt. I mean, you want to season as you go, and you don't want to oversalt, because you can't take that salt back out. But it's going to take a good amount of salt to season mashed potatoes properly. And then I prefer white pepper, not because of the look. All right, some people say, well, you add white pepper to mashed potatoes because of the look. It's like, well, screw that. If you prefer black pepper, then have like little chunks of black pepper in your potatoes. But I prefer it because white pepper has a kind of funky barnyard flavor to it, and to me, that's in very small amounts, that's kind of what mashed potatoes should taste like. It's an important secondary flavor component for me in my mashed potatoes, which is a personal preference. I also like to load my mashed potatoes with other things, so chives, roasted garlic. You can do minced shallots that you've sautéed. Sour cream is awesome, and of course bacon bits, homemade, is never a bad option. And in that case, right, what I'll do is, so if I'm going to add bacon or I'm going to add sour cream because they're additional fat components, I'll add the bacon with the bacon fat first. That's warm in the pan. I'll add my shallots, which has a little bit of fat and melted butter in the pan, and I'll add my sour cream. I'll kind of start to stir it in, and I'll add that purely for the flavor, and then I'll add additional butter and cream to reach the fat content that I want. And once all my ingredients, my herbs are added, I'm going to check for final seasoning. Yes, John?
Where would you use xanthan gum?
So xanthan gum I would use if I was making palms puree, which personally I wouldn't serve on Thanksgiving. But we used to do a technique where I'd basically take, I'd make a flavor base, and you can do anything. So you can take red bell peppers and you cook them down in wine and whatever else you want. And once they were soft, I had some stock and some wine in there. I'd place them in a blender, blend it up, add xanthan gum, and then mount it with a ton of butter. So it gave me this really buttery, emulsified flavor base. And then I would take the potatoes that were cooked, I'd pop them right in my food processor, and I would mix with a ton of this flavor base that would basically make them a little bit thicker than a potato soup, but it was like a puree that would stand up on the plate. And because it mixed so quickly, and it passed through to me so quickly, I didn't have to worry about the glue, not to mention there's a ton of fat in there. But the xanthan gum was specifically to allow me to add more fat than you would normally be able to add to a palms puree without it breaking.
But you wouldn't need it for that mashed potatoes?
No.
Okay.
Would you ever cook your potatoes in chicken broth?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would, but I mean, then you'd have to either toss your chicken broth, which I wouldn't recommend, or reincorporate your chicken broth back into your potatoes. But really, for me, once the potatoes are cooked and they're rice and they're ready to absorb liquid, I want that liquid to be fat. Because it's Thanksgiving and they're mashed potatoes. Yes.
Cranberries. I always end up making that lousy recipe with the orange and the fresh cranberries for my husband, and then I make a cooked version with pear and cinnamon and allspice. You have an easy way to make us both happy?
Yeah, so first of all, you're talking to a guy who loves the gelled cranberry sauce out of the can. Me too. It's one of those, it's a flavor from your childhood, okay? It's nothing like fresh cranberry sauce, and it shouldn't be anything like fresh cranberry sauce. It's your childhood, and the turkey sandwich the next day doesn't taste the same without a big hunk of that fake gelatinized cranberry sauce on your bread.
The little ridges on it, so you can.
Absolutely. And you don't chop it up. You got to cut it out of the can. You got to present it with the ridges. Okay? Yeah. Again, no shame, right? You can't cook with shame. But with that said, we do a homemade cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving here at Stella because it's expected, right? And we keep it very, very simple. We use some fall spices in very small amounts, and we basically boil the cranberries in a little bit of water with a ton of sugar, because they're super, super sour. And that's pretty much it. And then we cook them down, and then when we pour it into a large Cambro container for storage, it sets up like a jelly, mainly because of the sugar and some of the pectin that's extracted from the cranberries themselves. So, and then we use that, but we keep it simple because it's a simple condiment. And if you get too fussy with it, if you try and get too creative with it, it's going to throw people for a loop. Because in reality, all they want is that canned stuff anyways. That's what I want. If I came into Stella, I'd be like, wait, you don't have some of that canned stuff? And we do. We have some just because we don't want to piss anybody off.
So
Do
what
you
are your
keep some
fall
on hand?
spices?
For Thanksgiving Day, yeah.
For the people that's what they're.
Yeah, we don't really get requests. I think people are afraid to request it, but.
What are your
That would be
fall
kind of a fun
spices?
thing to add.
Cinnamon, allspice?
Yeah, so little, allspice, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. And to be honest with you, it changes every year depending upon just kind of like what I feel. I just say, hey, I add fall spices, so I just kind of, a little clove, little this, little that. But I'm talking like a very small amount of whole spices, toasted and ground up, and used for just a very subtle background hint of seasoning. Yes, sir.
I like smashed red potatoes
Uh-huh.
with skin on. Because
Yep.
That's what I like. So I should still follow the step for the 160.
Nope. No. So I would just, again, this is just other options available to you to make your own decisions. But yeah, I think an important step is still to maybe cut them in half or cut them into quarters and do the rinsing step to get off any excess starch. But they're not quite as starchy as russets anyways. And then you just boil them, pour off the water, and you smash them with butter and milk or whatever else you like to do right there in the pot. Okay. Any more questions on Thanksgiving food? Yes, Jim.
Do you have a tammy here?
A what?
A tammy?
We do.
Can you show us?
I will.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it looks like.
Yeah, that's,
Because I'm looking online and it's confusing, because it looks like it's just a big cake pan with a screen on the bottom.
Yep, but that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's basically a metal ring with a screen attached to it.
And then and then you have to have a scraper or something.
Yeah, with the scrapers cheap. The Tammys are kind of expensive because they have to stand up to applied force. So if you get one that's cheaply made, you're gonna push the screen right off. Because you're basically forcing things through a screen.
Any other side dishes that you like to serve?
I like.
Green bean casserole?
No, actually, wait. I do a real deal green bean casserole. At home sometimes. We don't do it here at Stella because it's kind of involved and it's hard to execute. But what you want to do is you want to take your green beans and blanch them like you would normally do. And then you make a bechamel sauce. We have a video online about that, but it's basically a milk sauce that's thickened with a roux, and you mount it with some butter. And I like to add some minced garlic to it. And I coat the green beans in this bechamel sauce, place it in the oven, bake it, and I take separate yellow onions that I slice super thin on a mandolin, and I soak overnight in buttermilk. And then when the green bean casserole is done, and basically, so at this point, you're just warming it through, right? And you can do like a breadcrumb crust or whatever you want to do, or you can throw in some almonds. Slivered almonds and green beans is never a bad idea. So you can doctor it that way. But what makes it nice is because you always have the onions out of the can, right? At least my grandma used to put on them. So, yep, you do the French's onions. So for me, what I do, and also too, if you have a little like a dry ranch packet, if you throw that into your bechamel sauce just a little bit, it cranks it up a notch. Trust me, okay? Because
The secret sauce around here, I think.
well, what's in a ranch packet? It's dried herbs, dried garlic, and MSG, right? So shave the onions on a mandolin, soak them for at least an hour in buttermilk, but you can do it overnight or a couple of days in advance. Then you make a flour dredge seasoning, flour them, dust them, you fry them right when your green bean casserole is about ready to come out of the oven, and you just pile them on top. And it's basically an excuse to eat like onion strings, but you have some green beans to go along with it so you feel like you're healthy. But not too healthy because you soak the green beans in bechamel sauce. Okay?
Thank you.
So, and I like Brussels sprouts too because they're in season around Thanksgiving time. So I like to do a little bit of Brussels sprouts. Nothing crazy though.
How do you cook the Brussels sprouts? And
Blanch them whole.
blanch them whole in chicken stock or?
Yeah, I'll blanch them whole in water. Okay, boiling salted water. Blanch them whole. Take them, cut them in half after I've chilled them in an ice bath, and then I sear them in a pan, cut side down to caramelize them. And from there, I'll toss it with. I like to do like some walnuts and maybe like an emulsion. The honey anchovy emulsion that we used the other night for our steak set, I think that goes great with Brussels sprouts. And that emulsion was actually originally developed for our Brussels sprouts. And we kind of transfer over to the steak set, so it works really well. And I just toss them in that glaze, and it's real easy and just throw it on a plate. Thing with Brussels sprouts is they can taste like rotten eggs if you overcook them, because of the same reason why overcooked eggs taste like rotten eggs, sulfur compounds. So Brussels sprouts contain sulfur. The longer you cook them, the more the sulfur compounds are released, and it gives you that weird eggy flavor, which is why a lot of people don't like Brussels sprouts, because mom cooked them to hell, and then you ate them and like, Mom, it tastes like rotten eggs. Shut up, eat your vegetables, So.
Roast them too, probably sometimes, do you?
Yeah, you can roast them, but I always blanch them first because they're a pretty sturdy green. So I want to set their green color, and then I want to use a secondary finishing process to give them a high heat finish. Because I like a little bit of brown, I like a little bit of caramelization on my.
And then pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie, okay, let's talk pumpkin pie, because I got a real simple recipe for this. All right, but it's not a recipe, it's a technique. Okay, so I make a custard filling for the pie, okay, and so for the crust, I do a ginger snap crust. So you take ginger snaps, you get them from Safeway. Get yours early this year, because we can't buy ginger snaps from any of our purveyors. I don't know why. Like they only sell to supermarkets. So every year we go and we clean out Safeway. So go early, because we clean them out. We take their shelf and we just whoosh into our shopping cart and take off. Okay, and then we take the ginger snaps. We throw them into a food processor. We grind them up into, just almost like a breadcrumb consistency. And we take melted butter and we stream it in. How much melted butter? Just until you can squeeze it together. So when the melted butter has moistened enough to where you can squeeze the ginger snap together and it will hold its shape, then you're ready to go on to the next step, which is you take a pie tin. You place the crust in the bottom of the tin and you press it down and up around the edges. Now, because of the butter, what's going to happen is you're going to do what's called a false bake. So you're going to bake it just with the crust, and you're going to pull it out, and you're going to be like, oh no, my crust completely collapsed, right? And that's just because the butter softened a little bit. And so what you want to do is let it cool slightly. But what I do is I take it's like a regular drinking glass, like a round drinking glass with a round base, and I just press down in the center of the pie crust, and it makes a nice thin layer again. It pushes the rest of the crust up along the edges, and I take my hands. I'm usually wearing gloves because it's kind of hot still, and I press it in. And I'll bake it like a 350 for maybe 12 minutes until the crust is just warm. And you want to work it out of the oven while it's still hot, because once it sets, it's going to set hard. So then I set that aside. Take my pumpkins. You want to get the small red baking pumpkins, because the large carving pumpkins are pretty much tasteless. They don't taste like anything. Or you can use your favorite canned pumpkin mix, okay? But either way, you're going to take your pumpkin, take out the flesh, you want to steam it, and then once you can mash it, you're going to combine about every 3 ounces of pumpkin flesh or canned pumpkin mix with about 1 egg yolk and 2 ounces of cream. And you're going to set this, and it should be kind of liquidy, okay? And then you're going to set this over a double boiler. If it doesn't look liquidy enough, then you might want to add some more cream. And you're going to stir over, so you have a bowl over a boiling pot, and you're going to stir until medium ribbons form. And what you're doing is you're basically making a custard. And then to this, you add whatever you like in your pumpkin pie. I like a little bit of ground toasted cinnamon, a little bit of clove. Nothing too crazy. Definitely some brown sugar. You want some sweetness as a pie, so sweeten your custard filling. And you're just baking a pumpkin custard is all you're doing. You take that, pour it into your pie crust, and you let it set. Once it sets, you're ready to go. You can slice it.
You don't have to rebake the custard.
Nope, because I'm cooking the custard separately in the bowl. So once you have those medium ribbons, the custard is to the consistency that I like it. Then you pour it in, and it sets up.
Oh, exactly.
I think I was the only person that had your pumpkin pie dessert on Sunday night. It was just so delicious.
We didn't have a
Sweet potatoes.
Oh, sweet potato pie, yeah.
Sweet potato, it's
Yeah.
like the same process, right?
Yep.
Custard.
Yeah, very similar.
So delicious.
And for pies, because people have so the open faced pies, that's what you're going after, and that's why they have you put egg yolks and cream into your pies. But you have more control if you just do a standard stovetop custard, and then that way you can pass it through a strainer too. So I'll take the pumpkin, and you can actually blend it with a little bit of cream or a little bit of a flavored liquid and into a thick puree, and you're basically adding egg yolks and more cream to that puree to first thin it out, and then the egg yolks will slowly coagulate as you whisk it. And so you can use your favorite custard recipes that work for you, and you just use them as a pie filling, and you just false bake that crust.
So you could usually, like Libby's recipe, but you would just be cooking it on top of the stove, in a sense. I think
I'm not familiar with the recipe, but if they call
might have whole egg in it though.
if they call for eggs and cream, that's fine because they're basically doing the same thing, but you're just being more accurate by cooking it on the stove top and then passing it through a strainer if you have one, just to make sure that if any eggs did fully coagulate, you have a finer texture. So you have a really fine, smooth texture, which you're not necessarily going to get from the oven, and you let it set in the pie crust that's already been baked, and then you're ready to go.
So this custard could also be thrown into your ice cream maker too, correct?
You need a little bit of a different formulation to spin it properly. But you could, in the sense that depending upon if it was too soft or too hard, you'd have a starting point to formulate a pumpkin ice cream recipe.
Okay.
And you're just kind of whipping it in the stuff?
Yep. Yeah, you want to whisk it, and you want to whisk it constantly. It's going to take about 15 to 20 minutes.
This is great. This is prep that we're going to. My question to you is, you've talked a few times, and you've seen a few times, that when you serve your meat, sometimes you carve it and sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm.
What's the rule to carve meat for guests?
So presentation is one. Also, how it's going to be served. So if you're serving it family style, then you want to carve it because it allows people to portion out how much they want easier. If it's a cut that needs some navigating, so you always want to slice against the grain. So if I'm serving like a tri-tip, obviously you want to slice that because it's a big piece of meat anyways. But when you slice against the grain, it's going to be more tender as well. Also, like when we're serving like our duck breast, we like to slice that because it allows us to check the temperature, and even if you cook the breast properly and you cook the skin properly and you crisp it, the skin can still be slightly chewy, and that's just duck in general, and it's not a big deal. I don't have any aversion to chewing my food. Some people do. So if you slice it nice and thin, then it's cutting down on the length of those collagen strands that could still exist in the skin, even if you cooked it properly. And then when they cross-cut it with their fork and take a bite, it's going to seem more tender and less chewy. So those are the reasons that we would slice our meat for presentation. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's take a real quick break, maybe 10 minutes, and then we're going to come in. We're going to assign food for tomorrow's final project. And then we are going to go from there, and we're going to start our bread baking day. Okay?